So here we are in Capture One. We photographed 721 images that day, and I feel like you've seen a lot of this. You've seen most of the process in the previous filming of this, so I'm just going to run through it real quick. The few things I want to show you is here, which is one of the early frames that we captured, and look at what my settings were on the camera at that time. Really quite low, 2687 Kelvin. Now, as I mentioned before, we should put this around 5500. That is our daylight neutral, and you will see you get a really heavy warm tone. This is because the bulbs that is in these lamps is neutral at about 3000 Kelvin. So I'm going to take these down to about 3000, and that's about neutral for this place. Now, we talked about the color palette and the mood I wanted up front, and it's definitely not warm and happy. It's cooler and more dramatic. Talked about the pools and pockets of light, a cinematic quality. So I decided to push this way further down eventually. So I'm just going to run you through some of these frames real quick, even if you've seen a lot of it. Terrible pictures, so don't judge me on that. It's really just for me to get a sense of where the elements would go. We started with the bed up against that first wall. Didn't really work. We turned it around. And this is not that far from where we ended up, to be honest. Warmer tones, we got it just to stand in as I shaped my light. And when we kind of got real about it, I started to shape the color tonality into what you see on the screen right here. So let's take a look at what this is. I mentioned in the introduction the Kelvin and the tint kind of working together. The Kelvin working in this spectrum, warm down into cool, and tint working from green into magenta. So here we have the tint traveling way into the green tonalities, and here it's traveling into the magenta tonalities. So two purposes here. Let me see, I'm going to go back a tiny bit. I like this palette, a little greener, and obviously the Kelvin way down to create that coolness that we wanted. Now, I set this on location, and I ended up liking it afterwards. When I processed these files real quick before sitting here with you, I ended up just keeping this tonality. We are going to change it a little bit probably, but this is fairly close to where I want to end up. Again, I'm doing this changes here because the raw file and the conversion is better done than tweaking the color all the way from this warmth into this cool green afterwards in Photoshop. That's a big color shift, and it's way better done when you do it in the raw converter. So I could go through a few of these, but essentially you've been through the whole process, saw me shooting it, saw my thoughts as I did it. So there's not really all that much more to this. When I interact with talent, I try to put myself in a mode that reflects the mode that I would like to have from them. So if I were a lifestyle shooter in this moment and wanted someone jumping on the bed, I would be amped up and full of energy and project that stuff and just go woo-hoo-hoo, and have them sort of reflect the energy off of what I sort of give them or project on them. In this case, I wanted something really quiet, and I didn't really say all that much. It was muted. I let them be quiet. I just told them a little bit about what the situation were and let them just have at it, giving them some compliments on their beauty here and there. But for that, it's really just leaving them alone in a bit and letting their body language do the talking in some ways. So I have to say, Tia, just an absolutely stunning woman. And I don't think we could have asked for a lot better model for this. I talked initially about the red hair color and was part of the reason I chose her. Now, we've taken a lot of that red out by adding a lot of green. So we'll see maybe later in Retouch, maybe we'll bring some of that redness back or process a file that sits in here and then again sits in here, and we'll layer the two to bring some of that red color that you have in her hair back into the photograph. I struggled a little bit with the muted sort of tonality in this. I wanted some pop of color, but I ended up embracing the muted only blue-green tonality in this picture. So maybe as I retouch this together with you, we'll change that trajectory, but it seems to be a picture that sits in this world that's very desaturated and monochromatic in color. So let's look at that for a minute. When it comes to my settings up here, which we briefly talked about in the previous prerequisite, the exposure has come down a tiny bit. I wanted it to be really moody, so we can maybe pull that up. That would maybe help it a tiny bit, but I liked it to be really quite down. And then there's the saturation. Fully saturated, it feels too almost neon-like in the color palette for me, and that will happen when you have a lot of tungsten lights around. So obviously we want to desaturate that so it's a little bit more muted. So I'm not sure if it's too much more to assess in this capture one part to this. The color is set, it's processed the same way as in the previous segment at 110%, and that's really it. We spent a lot of time on this photograph. It was not as simple as I mentioned when I sat there and talked about what we were going to accomplish today. It's just one room into another, which ended up being one small door, expanding doors, too tight, so I had to really tweak frames to get the perspectives right. The woman came a little too close to the guy, worked on flopping her. There's a lot of stuff here, but again, I'm excited to share this process and journey with you, and you could actually see and learn from something that's not quite as easy that I thought would be a lot easier to begin with. So I think that's it. I'll leave you with this, and we're going to jump into creating the backplate.